Well, ladies and gentlemen, in this video, we are going to be continuing our walk down memory lane when it comes to the AFL finals. And today we are just going to be looking at some of the greatest qualifying finals in history over the past 25 years since the 2000 AFL season. Of course, the AFL finals kicking off this weekend at the time of recording. And I have already made a video going back through all the old elimination finals through history. So go and have a look at that video if you are interested. But let's get right into the qualifying finals way back in the year 2000. We did have a big upset in the game between Melbourne and Carlton. Most people expecting an Essendon and Carlton grand final. They did finish 1 and 2 on the AFL ladder, but a young Melbourne side came from behind and knocked off the Blues thanks to a 7-goal final quarter. And you may remember a young Cameron Bruce kicking the sealer in that one. The D's would ultimately go on to make the grand final, but get blown out by the Bombers, who were clearly the best side that year. 2 years later, we did have another big upset in a qualifying final in the year 2002, with Collingwood going over to Football Park in Adelaide and knocking off the Power. This young Collingwood side, coached by Mick Malthouse, was not really given any chance of winning this game. Port Adelaide had finished in first on the AFL ladder. They were 5 wins ahead of Collingwood in the home and away season, but the Pies led all night in a massive upset and would make their way to the grand final ultimately in the year 2002. And this was really the beginning of Port Adelaide's finals chokers tag that was labelled against them in this early period in the 2000s. It would take them winning a premiership to shake that tag. In 2005, we had an epic qualifying final over in Perth at Subiaco Oval between the West Coast Eagles and the Sydney Swans. This was the start of a crazy rivalry between these two clubs, playing some epic grand finals and a couple of memorable qualifying finals as well. The Eagles coming from behind at home at three-quarter time to overrun the Swans and ultimately win their way through to a home preliminary final. Of course, these two teams would meet again in the grand final, and the result would be reversed, with the Swans winning by 4 points on that occasion. And this West Coast Sydney rivalry in that 2005 to 2007 era was so incredible. 5 games decided by a combined 12 points, including 4 finals and 2 grand finals in that run. One of the most epic and memorable rivalries in the modern era in the AFL. We did have another very interesting qualifying final in the same year, 2005, with St Kilda going over to Football Park and knocking off the Adelaide Crows, who had finished the home and away season in first place. The 4th place Saints causing a big boil over in Adelaide. No one really gave them a chance. Saints legend Robert Harvey was massive in this game. He kicked 3 goals and had 31 touches. A young James Gwilt popped up and kicked a couple of goals as well. And the Saints would beat the Crows, go through to a home preliminary final. Ultimately, they would lose that to the Swans. In 2006, it was the second of the Sydney West Coast qualifying finals in as many years, also at Subiaco Oval in Perth. And we already know the story here. It was another epic, close battle between these sides. This time it was the Swans winning through to the preliminary final. A big upset at that point in time. The Swans were 4th and the Eagles 1st. And this game is most remembered for Michael O'Loughlin kicking the winning goal and absolutely giving it to the West Coast Eagles supporters sitting in the front row of the cheer squad. It is an iconic image and very funny. Of course, these clubs would meet in the grand final 3 weeks later, and the scores would be an exact inverse, with the Eagles winning by 1 point, 85 to 84. The following year, it was again the Eagles in a qualifying final, this time going down to Port Adelaide at Football Park. A tight struggle, not an overly memorable game looking back on it. Port did win through to that preliminary final as a result. This game is sort of seen as the end of an era for that Eagles team of the mid-2000s. They did suffer a lot of injuries in the back end of the 2007 season, as well as in this final. You do have the iconic photo of Ben Cousins walking down the race injured. Ultimately, their season would be derailed after this loss, going out in straight sets. It was the last year with Chris Judd and Ben Cousins on the list. And the Eagles did go down to near the bottom of the ladder for a couple of years before rebuilding. Of course, 2007 not looked back on fondly for Port Adelaide supporters because we all know what happened in the grand final of that year. In 2010, we did have another epic game between St Kilda and Geelong at a very wet and cold MCG on that night for the qualifying final. A titanic wet weather struggle. It was neck and neck all night, but St Kilda just edging out the Cats. Of course, Cameron Ling kicking with about 45 seconds left what he thought was the winning goal, but the umpire paying a free kick for a push in the back to St Kilda in the build-up. The goal was disallowed. The Saints did hold on. Of course, Cameron Mooney famously saying in the umpire's effects mic, "You've just lost us the game," when the free kick was awarded. 2010, of course, would end in heartbreak for the Saints, and Mark Thompson would ultimately resign as Geelong coach after the 2010 final series. In 2013, it was a match between Fremantle and Geelong, and this was the infamous Geelong final in Cardinia Park. The AFL deciding to schedule the first final in Geelong since 1941 because all 4 games in the first week of the finals that year were held in Victoria. Typically, they would go to Marvel Stadium, but given the argument that Fremantle wouldn't draw a big enough crowd, they decided to go down to Geelong and play it at Cardinia Park. It was a very controversial decision at the time. Ross Lyon came out and said, "We're going to beat anyone, anywhere." And Geelong and Freo sort of had a bit of a rivalry at this time. The Dockers did beat the Cats in the previous year's final series. There was quite a few close games between the clubs in that period. You did have Ryan Crowley and Steve Johnson going at it in those tagging battles. And it was Fremantle who ran out victorious in this game at Cardinia Park. Of course, that goal at the end from the boundary throw-in, Aaron Sandlands tapping it down to Stephen Hill, who'd just come off the bench. He took 4 or 5 bounces, ran to about 30, 40 metres out and slotted the goal. Freo would go on to make their first and to date only grand final, and it will be heartbreak for the Cats in the preliminary final against the Hawks. In 2016, it was another Geelong-Hawthorn battle. Of course, we expect that from these clubs. So many awesome games in that era, really after the 2008 grand final all the way through to around this game. There was a number of fantastic finals between the clubs. It was the Cats getting the chocolates on this occasion. The Kennett curse, remember, had been broken by this point when the Hawks did beat the Cats in the 2013 prelim. Hawthorn going on to win the premiership in 2013, 14 and 15. They were chasing their 4th premiership in a row, which would be an equal record. It was another tight game. Isaac Smith marked with around 15 seconds left. He had a shot after the siren to win the game. He did push it out to the right and missed. And it was the Cats going through to the prelim. They ended up losing that to the Swans, and the Hawks would go out in straight sets to the eventual premiers, the Western Bulldogs. In 2018, we did have another awesome game between the West Coast Eagles and Collingwood. This was the first final ever played at Optus Stadium, which was newly built at the time. It was a scintillating game. The ball was moving from end to end at rapid speed. Very high quality game from these two clubs. Pies were definitely the underdogs in this one, but they found themselves holding a lead for a lot of the second half, including at the 20-minute mark of the last quarter. But it was the Eagles, buoyed on by a ferocious home crowd, kicking 3 late goals to win it, including a goal from Lewis Jetta where he hit the iconic Ronaldo-style celebration. The Eagles running out victorious by 16 points on that occasion, and of course they would go on to play each other in the grand final of that year, which was another awesome game. And lastly, we do have the 2022 qualifying final between Geelong and Collingwood. From a couple of years ago, they got a massive crowd in of around 91k for this MCG Saturday twilight fixture. This does go down as the best game of the 2022 season. Geelong were minor premiers. They were premiership favourites, but they had their issues in the finals, well, really since their last premiership in 2011. They almost always made the top four, but more often than not, they did lose the qualifying final or the prelim final and fail to make the grand final, including in 2019 where Collingwood beat them in the qualifying final. And Collingwood was sort of the surprise packet of the 2022 season with their new coach, Craig McRae. You remember Nathan Buckley being sacked at the end of 2021, and McRae came in. He installed all this belief in Collingwood. There were a lot of mercurial close wins, comeback wins. Remember Jamie Elliott's goal against Essendon in the Anzac Day game. Also Jamie Elliott kicking a goal in the dying moments of the game against Carlton in round 23, which did get the Collingwood Footy Club into the top four. And it looked like the Pies might just pull it off again in the qualifying final. Scores were level with just over a minute to go, but Geelong ultimately good enough to get out the back. And Max Holmes kicked the easy goal from the goal square to win it. And from there, the Cats would win the prelim and the grand final pretty easily. And Collingwood would ultimately lose to the Swans in the prelim of that year by 1 point. So that does do it for the qualifying finals since 2000. Hopefully this weekend's games will be added to this list in the future. That is going to be all we're going to have time for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the finals and don't forget to subscribe for more.